Welcome to Modern Home Masterminds with beSpoke Brokers. I'm Shauna Glazier, designated broker and owner.
And I'm Brittany Williamson, associate broker with beSpoke Real Estate. We are beSpoke Real Estate, and we're also your guides to modern luxury across the state of Arizona.
Each week, we chat with masterminds shaping the modern spaces. Do you want to intimately get to know your architect, builder, design team? Open communication and relationships is the key to that.
From architects to builders, designers, and more, let's explore the art of modern living together.
All right. Welcome back, listeners. Have you ever looked at a piece of modern art and wondered what kind of imagination it would take to build that? Our guest today is artist Pete Deise, and Pete is going to share a bit about his creative process.
Yes, Shauna, Pete is a sculptor who uses steel, of all things, as his main medium. If you've lived in the Valley for any length of time, you've probably seen his work. In fact, I think we spotted a couple pieces in this building that we're in right now.
Yes, we spot them all over. And before we dive in, I think what I want to start with is, Pete, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're excited. I think if we could have you describe maybe what your art is to our listeners before we get started, how would you describe it? And I'm curious because a lot of the time I try to describe your art and I always end up just pulling up your Instagram to show them. But if we have to describe, how would you describe it?
As an affliction, I guess. That's probably the best way to put it. It's something I have to do. As far as what it is, I think it just, wow, that's a very open question. Can we start from the beginning?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dive in.
We'll do a 30-second lineage on this. The new work is very fluid, very, undulating forms. It's kind of like if the sun shot off a solar flare and we captured it. Those are parts of the complex pieces that grew out of a lineage from like 25 years ago, which all started from the idea of like science, biology, single cells. The original pieces were like protozoas and things of that nature, because that's what I had been looking at. And then it evolved into more natural forms like seeds. And then over the years, it started to open. So the forms became more, I guess, almost flower-like, life-like, branching-like. And what I would say is, just like nature, you've got like plant life, animal life, rocks. Each of them have branches and they grow and evolve, came out of that. So all of the lines of my work come from one of those branches, those seed-like forms, or those microscopic-like forms, or like the natural tree-like forms. So where we're at now is there's sort of like three branches. There's the large unsprung pieces, which are the spiraling pieces that you see. Like there's one right down the street here on 2nd or 3rd Street. Those are their own lineage. And then pieces like you'll see in the construction zone, that those geometric lines, that was part of the crystalline geometry series. So that was more, I would say, like rock, like the facets, the fractals of branching formations, et cetera. And then the last are the very fluid, active, complex pieces that you see. They're very wild and they just grab your mind. From that now, I've been pulling out. So you have very complex fluid forms, and I'll take one piece and just focus on those curves, kind of like a woman's body, like a shoulder or something like that. And that becomes its own entity. So they are evolving like out of the form and more into like the verb, which is just the movement. And so that's kind of where we're
Is that last series more of like the thicker ribbons?
The thicker ribbons.
So what do you call that series?
Depends on the day.
Okay. All right.
Well, it started from Dice Candy because I was doing the small pieces and they just resembled like that really candy-like form.
And tell our listeners when you say the candy, and also that for scale, how small are the small ones? How big are the medium, and what size are those big ones?
The small ones are about like this big.
No, our listeners can't see that.
They can't?
Well, some of it, so it's going to be, aired
so like
sometimes.
The small ones are like the size of a horse eyeball.
Okay.
And then the large pieces can be like the size of maybe if you took two cars and turned them on end and stacked them on top of each other. Is that visual enough?
Yes. No, that's perfect.
Great.
And so, like I said, each of these forms is sort of an evolution of those original ideas.
Yeah.
And they all have stories for like where they come from. But now, like the ribbons you talked about, are what I would say is just beauty, like a donut. Like I know that sounds weird. Imagine like a full meal. Okay. So the complex pieces, the ones that have like the gnashing curves and the extreme movement, that's like a whole meal. These simple ones are just, it's the donut. And the glaze on the donut has to be perfect because you've got to look at it. And then when you taste it, it's an instant, like, boom. That's what I'm looking for from those simple ribbons.
That series is his dessert.
That's
I think
the
he's
dessert.
what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. And I think that's my favorite series too. It's very,
It's the hardest.
I don't know, is sexy the wrong word? It's like moody and sexy and sleek and.
Well, that's why I compared it to like a woman's shoulder. Or if you think of the right dress on a body, the way that it flows, nothing's blocking anything. It's not enhancing. It's this combination of like form and seduction.
I hope our listeners are like Googling this right now.
Right?
Like, what is he making?
What is he making?
It's like that yellow dress you wore to the last event you were at.
There you go. There you go. To the award dinner?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, those, and I will say those are the hardest pieces to make because your eye is distracted so easily by a curve that is wrong. On a complex piece, you can guide a person through the process with a simple single flow. If something's wrong, your eye just sees it right away and you don't feel it.
Yeah.
You have to be able to feel it.
Right. Where your other pieces, you can almost hide the mistakes.
You can layer over them.
Right.
You can build upon them. This is like de-evolution in a way. So.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. You mentioned the piece downstairs here being a cornerstone piece. What do you mean by that?
That was a cornerstone for the geometry, the crystalline geometry series. Before I could really figure out where I was trying to go with that, it had curves in it, and the crystalline geometry only has the straight lines that are fire tied, and where that came from was I was using what I call lines of force, like heavy wench lines and things of that nature, to create the complex curves in the thick ribbon pieces. And as I was looking at it, there was something phenomenal about the contrast. And we'll get here with the modern home with the ribbon pieces inside. It was the same idea. The lines were geometric. They were strong and straight and under tension, and they were causing the curves. And so I took the lines out, and they became their own identity. And what I did is I combined them. My Band-Aid's flipping around. Sorry. That's horrible.
It's better than a pool, in a pool.
Well, there's a hole there. There's a big hole in my hand.
Is that from building something, designing something?
It's not. Okay, so I'll finish that. So that with the geometry, I took that out of the equation and made it its own entity, and then started drawing it, and noticed that if you continue the lines and fractalize them, those lines become gemstones on the same basis that a plant grows branches at certain angles, like 30, 60, 90. If you continue those on, it becomes facets, just like a jewel. So that's where I started exploring the crystalline geometry. It was the crystal and the geometry combined that started from the lines of force.
That's crazy.
So it's kind of bizarre.
It organically just kind of happened.
That too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your creative process as far as like actually making these pieces. Like you were telling us on the phone about kind of how working outside and with the fire.
Well, I would say that the year is divided up into three parts. There's the sort of creative brainstorm, which happens now as soon as the weather starts to cool. And then spring is when things start to, form as far as the ideas. And then summer is the oven. It's the hell. I like to think of it like baking a cake. You find the ingredients, and then you mix the ingredients, and then you stick it in the oven, you bake it. Summer is when I actually make the pieces because my brain is so fucking fried. Am I allowed to say this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's about 149 degrees in the sun at the studio. And there is no creativity. There's only suffering.
Survival.
And survival, which is coping. And when there's coping, there's hyper-focus. And so when there's hyper-focus, you can continue to create the piece, assemble, if you want to say, the piece without distraction. Wintertime, your brain is alive. And so you got ideas and then you got 50,000 ideas. If you're trying to put that together, it just evolves all over the place. Whereas summer, it's like someone took your head, shrunk it down, and there's a little teeny tiny hole that you look out of, and you just know that curve has to go here.
It's like you're going on autopilot in that heat.
It's autopilot, and everything becomes this like super routine. It's like, get up, ride the river, do the workout, work on this piece, sweat and drink 4 gallons of water. Don't pee one time during that whole period. Go home, collapse on the floor, feel like you're dead.
Do it again.
Drink beer, go to bed, do it again.
So I think, that leads into, where do you get your inspiration from? You just mentioned the river, and I know a little bit about that. Yeah. So let's dive into that.
I'd say inspiration now is different, like I said, than the past. Right now, it's a lot of, it's the fluidity. It's sort of absorbing things that flow. Oh God, how do I put this? Like, it's what you feel. So if I'm feeling the flow of the river, or I'm feeling the blackness of the water, and I'm watching how water like collides and subdues itself and has whirlpools and stuff, that's a feeling in a sense. And so taking that feeling and translating it into something that is a physical exercise of manipulating the steel to make it feel that delicate and flow, I'm sort of taking that from nature, translating it through my filter, and then getting that same feeling, but now I have it. So a flow or a solar flare or the wind or whatever is ephemeral. You can't grab it. When I make something out of steel, I can touch it. I can look at it. I can wake up the next day and it's still there. I think that's part of the process. It's like a capture, a filter, and then you share it.
You're creating the feelings.
You're creating the feelings. And that's why I would say probably the best thing, you didn't ask this question, but galleries, non-galleries, whatever. Part of the reason that I don't put work in galleries has less to do with galleries themselves and more to do with, I like to connect with people and see how they react to things. My process is done when I've created the piece. It's done. I've birthed it. Sharing it with somebody, you can see immediately if they got that feeling or they didn't. And it's great when somebody gets that feeling. It's like, oh, you just shared that. It's like giving someone a hug and you feel them exhale. If you give someone a hug and they go, ugh, you're like, that didn't work out so well. Same kind of thing. If you share a piece and they're like, like, all right, that didn't translate. Why? And you don't get that. If you're in a gallery, it becomes a check. You just took this process, this piece that you love, and you've converted it to a piece of paper that you now pay a bill with. Like, that's not the same. I mean, I guess you could buy a race car. And that would be. I
mean, it's an interesting emotion, because I can imagine still not being associated with a gallery, dropping off art for a client or hanging art, or however that transition goes with you and your clients. Sometimes a client might not get it. And then that's got to be disappointing for the amount of work and effort that you put into it.
It's less disappointing. I think that if it was pure ego, then that would be a bruising. But it's more like, why? Why do I feel this and they don't? And I think you can learn something from that interaction. If that happens a few times and I'm excited, but they're not, it's like, well, what is it that I'm seeing here that they're not? How am I translating this inappropriately or incorrectly or whatever, And plus, what I like to tell people is if they don't like it, that's fine. I'll take it back and we'll go, throw it in the canal or something like that. So
resell it.
Sorry.
No, well, I want to go back to the inspiration just for a minute, because I know your relationship with the river and how you spend your mornings. I really think it would be interesting for our listeners to understand, if you're willing to dive into how much time you spend at the river, because that really, I feel like that is part of.
So we'll back up a few years. I started out in my youth, I think 18, 19, moved to California and was a lifeguard at Seal Beach. And so I did that full time, winter, summer, lifeguard boat, all that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of being immersed in the water and with like sea life really kind of evolved my brain as far as the fluidity of things went like that. When I moved back here to Phoenix, I think 5 years later, and got the original studio on Grand Avenue, 1994, maybe something like that, there was no water and there was no fluidity. And I don't think I had appreciated the desert yet. It was more just like, oh my God, I'm a fish out of water, literally. So I was swimming at this downtown Y. And I did that for, God, 20 years or so. And then COVID hit and they closed all the pools. And Phoenix Swim Club, I think, had a backlog, you know, and so there was nowhere to swim. And I was dying. I rode my bike. I'm sorry, I know you guys love riding bikes, but God, it's just, it's not the same as swimming, you know. So
Way better.
Jessie, so Jessie, my ex, she was like, let's go to the river. Like, I don't want to go to the stinky river. Last time I was there, I was tubing at like 16 years old. Everyone was drunk. I don't want to go to the river. She's like, let's go. My dog was dying at the time. It's like 17-year-old German Shepherd. She's like, let's take Casey to the river. And we went to the spot. All the parking was closed. We had to walk down to this spot at the river. And we put him in the water. And I looked around and I was like, son of a bitch, there's moving water. I'm like, I can get my surfboard and I can bring it back here and I can paddle in this and get a workout. So that was 2020. That was, I think, May the 13th of 2020 was the first day I went back with a surfboard and I started paddling upstream. And I've gone every single day except for Sundays since then.
Wow.
Do you always paddle upstream?
So I have a group that I put together for Sunset Saturdays where we do paddle down on inflatables. And that's like the sunset, the birds, you know, all that. I put like 15, 18 boards in my truck and we have a float down with that on Saturdays. The first year we did it every day. So I would paddle in the morning and then I'd go back, you know, so it was 25 miles out, 25 miles back, 25 miles out. And people would ask me, well, what's wrong with you? You know, and I would explain that, imagine this, it's February in Phoenix. I go out there and I paddle upstream in water that's coming down from the Verde now because the salt has shut off. It's 38 degrees in the water. It's about 35 degrees outside at that time in the morning. There's nobody. 6 million people in this town, and there's nobody out there except for duck hunters and me. I paddle a mile up. I get in and do a cold plunge. I watch Red Mountain change, and I'm getting to the inspiration. Don't worry.
Yeah. No, this is all part of it. This is all part of it.
It's like, where do you get that feeling? I mean, I live down here, downtown. I'm in the mix. When you're out there and some guy's firing a shotgun off over your head and a duck drops out of the sky and you take it over to him, it's like...
You're the retriever.
You know, and it sounds ridiculous for people who live in areas where there's a lot of nature, but I've seen eagles drop down and grab fish and photograph them right on the side next to me. You know, I've seen that Red Mountain, which is the sacred mountain, I believe, for the Pima Maricopa tribe, where the chiefs are buried up on the top. I've seen that in February with clouds that cover it and suck out the side. It looks like dragon's breath. Where you sit on that board and it's like, I'm getting chills right now. It's this thing that is exciting. And I think it's less about a true translation of, well, this is a mountain that inspires me. This is a tree. This is a flow. It's more like, oh shit, this is all making me have goosebumps and getting me alive. So you take that and put it into whatever you're doing. And that's like the juice, you know, that's what powers it all. And it's the opposite suffering of summer. Summer is hell at the studio, closing down. Winter is, I don't wear a wetsuit, so it's hell in the water, but it's,
I don't know how you do that.
It's floating down and just looking, and your brain is just open. You can smell everything, you can see everything, and you can't believe that you're the only person out there. It's like Disneyland.
And the wild horses.
And the wild horses. In the winter, it's wild cows.
Right.
There's those out there, and the otters. Sorry, one last story on that. Otters.
Yeah.
Really? Well, because I was doing a talk over at Gensler, and they're like, "Tell us about your work." And I feel like the work is like the shell for a mollusk or whatever. It's just something that is part of your life, but then there's this life inside of it. For me, this is the life. And they're like, talk about your work. So I thought, actually, I'm going to talk about what I saw this morning. And I had a video, and it was the craziest thing. I paddled out, and there was an otter. And I thought it was trapped in a fishing line because it was struggling. It was rolling around all over the place. I was like, what the heck's going on? And then I noticed there's something on its neck. And I'm like, oh, shit, did like a catfish get this thing? It's surreal in a sense. Yeah. So I open my box, I grab my knife, I start paddling over to it. I have my camera up. I'm like, I'm going to have to cut this thing off its neck. And I'm getting closer and closer. And I look, and it's another otter. And I'm like, okay. And then they're swimming toward shore, and they start making these noises. And I look, and I'm like, they're having otter sex.
You've interrupted them.
And I interrupted them. And I was like going to save the day. I literally interrupted them. And like those kind of moments, I like to come back into town and look around, and that contrasting reality of city work, creation, discipline, and oh shit. I mean, that I feel is what twists your brain into these creative spots. So that's the long answer for
it's what I heard you say in the middle of that is you feel alive, or you're living when you're doing that.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah. And just this like reconnection with nature, because I do think when we live in these big cities that we don't get that, it's all concrete and steel and we don't get that connection with nature. So the fact that your medium is steel and
but it doesn't look like steel.
Right. It doesn't.
And that's the part where, people always say, like, where do you like these pieces to go? Like, I like Andy Burns's houses. The houses he put together are simple, sort of heavenly spaces, beams, glass, concrete. And if you think about my work, those curves, they're that organic, that's not really organic, but it is organic. It's the tie. It's like you put the heart into the machine, and now it's all tied in together. So I really like that sort of interaction, non-distraction. It's both of them have their power. It's
like the final layer.
Yeah. It is amazing. We did see your installment that you had at Gensler. We toured Gensler when that was there. And so tell us about kind of why and how those installments come about.
That was actually a connection through ArtLink. I don't know if you know Katrina Kaler. She runs ArtLink. And so she had basically put together, I think it was 3 artists that would show over at that Gensler space. And so they had me bring 3 pieces down, and, that's what it was. It's a great space, great people. And it's just a cool place.
Yeah.
So,
it was, the work fit very well in there too, I think. Kind of what you're saying about the modern, modern clean lines.
There's another one. There's an interesting one next week, I think it is. It's this woman's putting on Desert Design Week, and they took those 2 homes, and what I'm running into mentally with the challenges is it's primarily like the ribbon pieces, and I'm worried that there isn't the context. That's something maybe you could answer better for me. When you see a ribbon piece of mine, if you didn't know about like the complex pieces or the other ones, would it still resonate for you?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's not like a contrast
I can answer that because I was not as familiar with your work as she was. And those were some of the first pieces that I saw, and it definitely resonated with me without having prior knowledge.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like an insecurity or something, but I'm like, oh no, I don't have I'm emptying out my purse, man. I don't have something to points of reference.
It's so interesting because, I mean, I know that you said you like being in the more modern construction zone houses, but I mean, once people, hopefully our listeners look up your art and they start getting familiar with it, if they're not already, I see it all over the place. I mean, Deises are all over the town. And then specializing in modern architecture and also, luxury properties, they're not just in modern homes. They're really, and your price point, I mean, for us, it's like 5 million plus. I'm seeing, I see you all over the place. So it's exciting every time I see a Deise.
It is.
I like that.
It is. So if somebody commissions you to do a piece for their modern home, what does that collaboration look like? Or is there a collaboration?
Probably less of a collaboration. It's really, I go back to the Instagram, which I think is a good sort of portfolio spot, even more so than a website, because you can have pieces. You can also have stories about water in the river on there. So it gives you, that context. But usually it's somebody showing me one of those branching veins that they like, I like these unsprung pieces. What can you do for me? And I go to them and say, well, show me the envelope. I don't mean like the money envelope, that too, but
what is the budget
show
that
me
I'm
where
working
this
with?
is going.
Space.
Yeah. Show me the space and what you do have to spend on that. And then basically just let me be. And when I do those, I kind of dwell on that space, if that makes sense. So the entire time I'm creating that piece, I'm also thinking about where that is going, just so that those forms can marry, together. But that's really it.
So like how they're going to encounter it during their regular day.
And partially because, sculpture is like, it's not like a painting where you look at it, you're looking at it front, side. A lot of times you're looking down on it, and open pieces, they change depending on how you see them. And so it can be like brutal to figure out if someone has an open air piece, how that's going to look from all, sides. But it's not so much input. I go back to Andy again. I think he's one of the few people that I've actually he's like, hey, Deise, can you do something like this? And I'm like, okay, because I trust him and his ideas. But a lot of people don't have that vision in that sense. So it's like, let me be, and you can buy me. You're basically buying my brain instead of being a tool that is like just doing something that you can't create.
Well, will they guide you on like a color palette? Will you take advice?
Yeah, I used to be a real dick about color, and I'll back up. So a lot of people ask me like for the rust pieces versus the colored pieces.
Gloss, yeah.
When I first started, most pieces were painted because I was doing oil painting at the time and drawing, and so I would make steel pieces and I would paint them with oil, so like purple whites and aquas and things of that nature. But I didn't like the way those finishes held up outside, so I went full raw. I would do in a show and someone said, hey, we love your fire pieces. And I'm like, they're not fire pieces, because all the models I had built were white. So they were evoking a flow or kelp or something, or the inside swirl of a shell. That's how I was seeing them. But they were seeing rusted fire. And I was like, oh no, never again.
Yeah.
And so I started powder coating them white. And then I would put in some aqua and I would do stuff. I was very pure about my colors. And Bentley Calverley, who has, the Bentley Gallery, pulled me aside one day and said, I don't think she said you're being an asshole, but she said, she's very frank with me. And she said something like, look, man, you got to let people choose their own colors. And she wanted a purple. And I was like, a purple? I hate purple. My son's 9 at the time. He loves purple. I'm like, no, is this like Phoenix Suns purple? Like, what do you want me to do here? And she's like, just try it. And so I did. And I did this purple. And I think I posted the small one on Instagram, and it was like sold in 30 seconds. And she was like, I told you, like color is a personal thing for people. So I learned my lesson and I let people choose their color. And so it teaches me about like greens, which I would never do in my lifetime. And I'll do one and I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Because color is personal.
No,
So
it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at that time in our show. We like to play a little game of rapid fire. So we want to ask you a couple quick questions meant to be answered one sentence or one word, whatever, something fun that comes to mind.
Yeah.
You in?
Yeah, I'm in.
All right. Well, we already know your favorite season for creating, but what is your favorite time of day to create?
At the very end of the day.
Huh.
Yeah. So like if I have to be done by 5, it's like 4:55 because then I'm squished. And it's like, it all makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's that hyper focus.
Yes.
Yeah. Art or science?
Yes.
Okay.
Both.
Well, that works. If you weren't an artist, what would you be?
Oh, wow. God. Geologist.
Huh.
Yeah.
That
I
makes
could see
sense.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. What is your favorite season?
Well, since we only have 2 seasons here,
True.
I'd say it's right in the middle of winter and summer. Whatever that is.
The hottest
Quick.
and the coldest.
Yeah.
Quick is what it is.
Yeah. Quick. That's true. The 2 weeks of pleasure.
What do you want people to feel when they see your work?
Oh. Amplified.
Just like our studio.
I know. I love it. Mark's going to love this. Plug for the Amplify Studio.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
like
great
that.
word, though.
Yeah.
They didn't pay me for that.
Free plug. No, that is great.
Yeah. Well, that is all we have as far as our rapid fire questions. Pete, thank you so much for being on our show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Now I get to ask a question.
Yes.
How did I do?
You're awesome.
Wonderful. Yes. No, it was so great to kind of see inside your mind and get an idea of how it works. I thought it was very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should see him in a studio space sometime.
Yeah.
God.
We'll have to do that.
It's
We'll have to go there one
insane
time.
over
Go
there
tour
right
it.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't even turn the forklift around there right now. There's so much going on.
I was mind blown when I went to pick up some art. I can't remember why I was there. And I was like, it's the middle of summer. He's working outside with fire.
And now we know that's when he works. So
Yeah.
we're going to go. We got to go then, which is fine.
Yeah.
Well, I know you've mentioned your Instagram several times. For our listeners, if they want, we're going to link everything in our show notes, but if they want to find you, can you tell them your Instagram handle?
Just like my name, Peter Deise, and that's Deise, not C. So Peter Deise, that's all it is.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for today's episode of Modern Home Mastermind. If you've enjoyed our show, please like, rate, and subscribe so we can let Pete know exactly how he did do.
Yes. And thanks to our guest, Pete, for sharing his insights. And to you, our listeners, thanks for learning about everything modern with us.
And if you are ready to take your next step in your real estate journey, please reach out to us at beSpoke Real Estate. And until next time, keep loving, living everything modern.